His phone rang from under my bed. "You're going to sue me?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and rising fury, as I slid the last photograph across the desk between us. In the dim light of my study, my husband stared at the evidence with eyes wide and desperate. Several grainy motel snapshots fanned out in front of him, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. His hand trembled as he picked up one of the pictures, then another. A red flush crept up his neck as he realized I knew everything. I stood opposite him, arms crossed tightly over my chest to hide the slight shake in my hands. I felt astonishingly calm. "Justice," I said softly, almost in a whisper. The word hung in the air like a blade. On the desk lay the lawsuit papers I'd prepared, alongside the divorce documents. I watched as he grappled to find words, his mouth opening and closing in silence. The same man who had begged for my forgiveness just days ago now looked at me as if I were a stranger. He sucked in a breath, eyes glistening. "You're going to sue me after everything I've been through? After I nearly died?" He finally choked out, voice hollow. He reached across the desk, not for me but for one of the documents, his fingers hovering uncertainly above the bold letters of his name on the lawsuit. It was the first time I had seen true fear in his eyes. I leaned forward, planting my fingertips on one of the photographs. It showed exactly what he had done. "After everything you put me through," I replied, each word measured and cold, "you will face the consequences." My heart was pounding, but my voice didn't waver. He recoiled as if struck. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and our unsteady breathing. His lips quivered. "Please. I was on the verge of death." He stammered, a tear slipping down his cheek. But I had no sympathy left. I lifted my chin, my decision resolute. "True love doesn't betray," I said quietly. "This is the result of your choices. Now live with it." He slumped back in the leather chair, the fight draining out of him. I could feel the sting of tears in my own eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him surrounded by the proof of his betrayal. I closed the door behind me, as if closing the door on that chapter of my life. Only a few weeks earlier, I had been living in blissful ignorance, following the well-worn tracks of our normal life. I was 37 years old, married to my husband, also 37, and we had spent nearly 2 decades building our world together. We shared a house full of memories, and our twin children, now 19 and off at college, were the pride and proof of our journey. Each day fit neatly into the next. Work, dinner, conversations about little everyday things. Sometimes we joked about how routine it all was, but there was comfort in that routine. It was our reality, familiar and safe. Even when my husband announced he had a 2-day work trip, we took it with the usual naturalness, a quick kiss goodbye in the early morning, a casual have a good trip as we went our separate ways. Nothing out of the ordinary. That day passed without incident. I went to the office, dealt with emails and meetings, the mundane grind that barely registered in my mind. By the time I returned home in the evening, the house was quiet. I cooked a simple dinner for one and ate in peaceful silence, vaguely aware of how different the place felt without him there. It was a silence I usually enjoyed whenever one of us was away, a brief chance to have the house to myself. That night, however, the silence began to feel unsettling. I was rinsing my plate when the phone rang, sharp and jarring in the stillness. Drying my hands, I checked the caller ID, mother-in-law. I smiled faintly, expecting a routine chat about her day, or maybe a question about the twins. "Hello," I answered, cradling the phone to my ear as I settled onto the couch. "Why, you have to come to the hospital." Quickly, she managed to say. Her voice was shaking, each word strained and broken. I stood up immediately. The urgency in her tone turned my blood to ice. "The hospital? What's wrong? What happened?" There was a jagged pause on the line. I heard her swallow hard. It's your husband. He's in the hospital. Something very bad has happened." Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into a sob. For a second, the room swayed around me. My husband? He was supposed to be miles away in another city, perfectly fine and working. I gripped the back of the couch with my free hand. I don't understand. He's on a work trip. Why would he be at our local hospital? I don't know. I don't know for sure," she cried, words tumbling out in a panic jumble. "Just come. Come now. Please." A cold, sick feeling spread through my stomach. I didn't wait for more details. I was already grabbing my car keys from the coffee table. "I'm on my way," I said, trying and failing to keep my voice steady. My heart was pounding so loudly, I barely heard her whisper hurry before I hung up. I don't even remember the drive to the hospital in detail, only fragments, the streetlights smearing into yellow lines, the rhythmic thump of my heart in my ears, my mother-in-law's panicked breath still echoing in my mind. I kept the call connected through the car's speakers as I sped through the night. She was sobbing, struggling to give me any coherent information. I caught words like attack and blood, and each one made me press the accelerator harder. Every terrible scenario flashed through my head. Was it a car accident? A mugging? Was he even conscious? When I screeched into the hospital parking lot, I jumped out without even locking the car. I spotted my mother-in-law pacing in the waiting room, wringing her hands. Her face crumpled with relief and anguish when she saw me. I rushed to her, and she folded me into a trembling hug. She looked as if she'd aged 10 years in a day. "What happened? Where is he?" I demanded, my voice high and thin. She avoided my eyes. He's in surgery, she said, voice quavering. Up close, I realized her blouse was spotted with dried blood. My husband's blood? I felt faint for an instant. Surgery? Why? Was there an accident? I pressed, hands on her shoulders. My mother-in-law's lips opened, but no answer came. She shook her head helplessly. I'm not sure. They just told me he was brought in with several wounds. An assault. They said it was an assault. Assault. I nearly yelled. Heads turned in the waiting room, but I didn't care. What do you mean assault? By who? Where? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know, dear. The police just called me because I was listed as his emergency contact. They found my number in his phone. I got here as soon as I could. They wouldn't tell me anything more. I realized I might get clearer answers from the staff. Gently detaching from her, I went straight to the reception desk and asked for my husband. The nurse on duty gave me a sympathetic look and paged the doctor. A surgeon in scrubs appeared a few minutes later, looking grave. He guided me into a small consultation room away from the general chaos. I felt my mother-in-law hovering anxiously in the hallway as the door closed behind us. Your husband was brought in with multiple stab wounds, the doctor said bluntly. My breath hitched. Stab wounds. He lost a significant amount of blood before arriving, but we've managed to stabilize him for now. He's still in critical condition, but he's alive. We're moving him to recovery soon. The word stab wounds clanged in my head. I gripped the sides of a chair to steady myself. This couldn't be real. My husband was supposed to be away on business. Not here, not bleeding on an operating table. How did this happen? Was it a robbery? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. The doctor hesitated. He hasn't been fully conscious to give details. The police will want to speak with him when he's able. But he cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. There were some indications that this was not a random attack. Some evidence on his body suggested a more personal nature to the assault. I frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? The doctor lowered his voice, as if someone might overhear. There were injuries that point to, a violent encounter of an intimate nature. He carefully avoided my eyes. He had bruising and lacerations in the groin area, which isn't typical in a street mugging. The pattern of wounds. It's something the police will explain in more detail, I'm sure. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My mind simply blanked, refusing to process what he was implying. A violent intimate encounter. Bruises in the groin. It almost sounded like... No, that made no sense. Why would someone harm him like that unless... I couldn't finish the thought. My voice was barely a whisper. Is he going to be okay? The doctor managed a tight smile. He's not out of the woods, but he's stable. We've repaired the internal bleeding. If there are no complications, he should make a full physical recovery in time. Physical recovery. The phrase hung unanswered in the air between us. And emotionally? I wondered. But even as confusion and fear for my husband's life warred inside me, one thought kept returning. This wasn't random. Someone had done this to him deliberately, even viciously. And I had absolutely no idea why. They let me see him once he was moved to a room in the intensive care unit. I crept in, my mother-in-law trailing behind at a respectful distance. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight of him pale and unconscious in that bed, bandaged and hooked to machines. There was an oxygen tube in his nose, and 4 lines snaked into both arms. I sank into a chair at his bedside, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. My mother-in-law stood sniffling at the foot of the bed. Thank God, she whispered when she saw his chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Thank God he's alive. I couldn't speak. I reached out and gently took his hand in mine. It was warm, solid, so normal, even as the rest of him looked so fragile. I wanted to sob with relief that he was alive, to rage with anger that someone had done this, and at the same time a strange numbness was settling over me, as if my mind refused to feel anything until it all made sense. The next hours passed in a blur. I alerted our children, trying to keep my voice steady as I told them their dad had an accident without going into scary details. I contacted his workplace to inform them something had happened. Meanwhile, doctors and nurses filtered in and out, checking vitals, adjusting tubes. My husband remained unconscious, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding him. By early morning, they moved him out of ICU to a private room, saying he was stable enough. I decided to stay by his side. There was no question of going into work. I notified my boss I'd need emergency leave. I spent those initial days at the hospital, coming home only briefly to shower and change clothes when I absolutely had to. When my husband finally woke up, groggy and in pain, I was by his side. I squeezed his hand and managed a smile I didn't feel as he blinked at me in confusion. "You're okay," I murmured. "You're safe." His memory of the incident was hazy, or maybe he just couldn't talk about it yet. He would drift in and out of sleep, gripping my hand as if anchoring himself from nightmares. I kept my questions gentle and few. Did he remember being attacked? What did the person look like? But each time, he closed his eyes and said, "Later." I can't. I'm tired. I didn't push. Perhaps I was afraid of the answers. Instead, I focused on small talk. I read him updates from the news, talked about how our twins were arranging to come home that weekend to see him. He listened in silence, his expression distant. There was a wall between us that hadn't been there before, built of unspoken fears and the unsettling unknown of what had really happened to him. I told myself it was just the trauma, the medication making him withdrawn. On the second morning, 2 police detectives arrived to take his statement. They introduced themselves softly at the door, their serious faces and dark suits sending a spike of anxiety through my chest. This was real. This was criminal. They asked me politely if I could step out while they interviewed my husband. I lingered in the hallway as long as I could, watching through the small window in the door. I saw the older detective leaning over the bed, speaking slowly. My husband looked pale and tense. I chewed my nails down to the quick, imagining what they might be asking. Was it an attempted robbery? Had someone followed him from a restaurant? Was it a hate crime, a random psycho? With every passing second, the possibilities grew more ominous in my mind. After what felt like an eternity, the detectives emerged and asked to speak with me privately. They led me to a quiet corner near a vending machine, away from other visitors. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, bracing for answers. One detective, tall, salt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we understand this is a difficult time," he began gently, "but we need to inform you about the nature of the incident involving your husband." I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "All right," I said softly. My voice almost failed me. "Please, just tell me. I need to know what happened." The 2 officers exchanged a glance. Then the older one spoke. "Your husband was not attacked on the street or at his hotel," he said. "The incident occurred at a local motel on the outskirts of town." "A motel?" I echoed, frowning. For a moment, the word didn't register. Why would he have been at a motel when he was supposed to be out of town? Maybe he drove back early? Before I could ask, the detective continued. "He was there with someone," he said, weighing each word. "With another woman. According to our preliminary investigation, they checked in together. At some point during their stay, this woman attacked him with a knife and fled." I stared at the detective, convinced I hadn't heard right. Another woman. Checked in together. My lips moved soundlessly before I managed to speak. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" He spoke louder, as if volume could make it sink in. "Your husband was having an encounter with a woman at a motel. That woman is the one who stabbed him. We have CCTV footage confirming they arrived together." It was as if the floor opened under my feet. I swayed, reaching blindly for the wall to support myself. "No," I whispered. It came out automatically, an instinctual rejection of the horror he was describing. I shook my head. "No, there must be a mistake. He was on a business trip." The second detective, a younger man with kind eyes, spoke up. "Ma'am, I know this is a shock. I'm so sorry. We're still gathering details. The woman fled the scene, but we're working on identifying and locating her. We suspect she was someone he knew." I pressed my back against the corridor wall, feeling it hard and real, something to keep me from collapsing. My heart was hammering out of my chest. He was cheating on me?" I asked, the words tasting foreign and bitter. It felt easier to focus on that than the rest. "He was with another woman." The older detective sighed. "We believe so. I'm sorry. Right now, our priority is finding the suspect. We have reason to think this wasn't a random act of violence, but a domestic situation that escalated. A domestic situation. The polite way to say your husband's affair exploded into bloodshed." I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The fluorescent hallway lights suddenly felt too bright, and the air was too thin. I was being humiliated and devastated in the same breath. My husband had an affair, and now that affair had nearly gotten him killed. At my silence, one detective gently touched my shoulder. "Ma'am, is there somewhere you'd like to sit? Can we call someone for you?" I realized then that tears were burning in my eyes, but none had fallen. I was stuck in a state between screaming and sobbing, incapable of either. I drew in a shaky breath. No, I'll be fine," I lied automatically. "I just need a minute." They gave me a sympathetic look and handed me a card with their contact information, explaining they'd be in touch, and that I shouldn't hesitate to call if I remembered or needed anything. I must have nodded, I'm not sure. By the time they walked away, I was so dizzy with shock that I sank onto a bench in the corridor, head in my hands. I don't know how long I sat there. Nurses and visitors passed by in a blur, their chatter and footsteps muffled as if my head was underwater. Inside, a hurricane was ripping through me, pain, anger, betrayal, disbelief. My quiet, loving husband of nearly 20 years had been living a lie. The man I thought I knew so well was suddenly a stranger who slept with someone else and got stabbed for it. A strangled sob finally escaped my throat, and I quickly slapped a hand over my mouth, looking around. I couldn't break down here. I had to pull it together, at least until I was alone. I forced myself to stand and walk, one foot in front of the other, heading nowhere in particular. Somehow I ended up outside the hospital, in a small garden area with a few benches for smokers. The early afternoon sun was glaring and hot. I remember that vividly, the way it beat down on me while my entire world was turning to ashes. I sank onto a wooden bench beneath a tree. Images kept flashing unbidden in my mind. My husband kissing some unknown woman, laughing with her, holding her hand as they enter a motel room. I imagined him in that room, betraying me in the most intimate way. Then I imagined the moment it turned violent. The shock on his face when she pulled a knife, perhaps an argument, her attacking him in a frenzy. I flinched hard, both at the mental picture of him being stabbed and the sickening realization of why he was even there to begin with. I don't know how long I sat there in the baking sun. The The grief and rage were so consuming that I didn't hear footsteps until a hand touched my shoulder. I looked up to see my mother-in-law's tear-stained face. Without a word, she sat next to me. "I was worried about you," she murmured, wiping her nose with a crumpled tissue. "You ran off. I figured you spoke to the police." I stared straight ahead at a patch of dirt where the grass had worn away. My voice when it came was hollow. "You knew, didn't you?" She said nothing. That was answer enough. A hot coal of anger reignited in my chest. Of course she knew. Perhaps not the details, but she had put two and two together as soon as the police called her. She likely suspected the truth before I arrived. And yeah, so that's why you wouldn't answer me in there, I said bitterly. That's why you kept saying you didn't know what happened. Her composure broke and she began to sob again, reaching for my hand. "I was afraid to tell you. I prayed it wasn't true." I snatched my hand away before she could touch it. I couldn't bear anyone's touch just then. For a moment, we sat in raw silence but for her sniffling. Finally she whispered, "I'm so sorry, dear." A firework of anger went off inside me at that. I turned to face her. "Sorry," I spat, my voice low and shaking. "Your son cheated on me. Your son lied to everyone and put himself in a situation that got him stabbed. Sorry, doesn't even begin to cover it." She recoiled, eyes wide. I had never raised my voice to her before, but I could see a flicker of defensiveness cross her face. "I know you're upset." Upset. I let out a short, harsh laugh. My hands were trembling uncontrollably now. That doesn't quite capture it. I was furious and devastated and disgusted all at once. My mother-in-law dabbed at her eyes. "Please listen," she implored softly. "This is a moment for compassion. He nearly lost his life." A sharp, bitter noise escaped my throat. Was she really about to ask me to pity him? To forgive him? I cut her off, voice like ice. "Don't you dare ask me to forgive this. Don't you dare." Her expression wavered, a flash of irritation breaking through her grief. "All I'm saying is, he's alive. We should be grateful. Marriages go through trials, mistakes." I shot up from the bench, unable to sit still a second longer. "Mistakes," I repeated, incredulous. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or overspending on a credit card. This was a choice. A series of choices that he made behind my back. And now everyone expects me to play the devoted wife and nurse him back to health as if he's the victim." My voice had risen with each word. A man walking by cast an uneasy glance our way. I didn't care. She stood too, reaching a tentative hand toward me. "Please, dear, keep your voice down. I know you're hurt. But right now he needs support." I stepped back, shaking with fury. He needed support? What about what I need? Or our children? Did he think about any of that when he was off screwing some woman in a motel? I was practically hissing, trying to keep my volume low but the intensity high. My mother-in-law flinched at my profanity. I'd never spoken so crudely in front of her, but I was beyond caring. Tears welled in her eyes again. He was wrong, yes. But this doesn't have to be the end. You both have so much history. And the children. I stared at her, incredulous. "You can't seriously believe things can just go back to normal." "No, not immediately," she faltered. "But in time, if you find it in your heart to forgive." "Stop." I held up my hand. I couldn't listen to another word of this. A cold clarity was settling over me, solidifying with each passing second. "It's over. He is over. We're finished." She stared at me as if I'd slapped her. "Don't say that. You're upset right now. People say things they don't mean." I met her gaze directly, my voice steely and calm in a way it hadn't been since this nightmare began. "I mean every word. My marriage is over." Behind us, a hospital ambulance pulled up, a paramedic hopping out. The normal world kept spinning around our private disaster. My mother-in-law looked at me with shock and dismay. "Think about your kids," she pleaded. "Think about all the years." Enough. I drew in a long breath, trying to steady the furious thumping of my heart. I have thought about my kids. They're the only reason I haven't completely lost my mind today. And I'll tell them the truth, because I won't have them thinking any of this was somehow my fault. A flash of something like guilt or fear crossed her face. Perhaps she had already considered how to spin this to extended family. The devoted wife who wouldn't leave her poor husband's side, versus the bitter harpy who abandoned him in his hour of need. Well, they would hear my side soon enough. "I need to go," I said, exhaustion washing over me as the adrenaline of anger ebbed a little. I suddenly felt unbearably weary, desperate for solitude. My mother-in-law's shoulders sagged. "At least stay until the children get here," she murmured. "They'll be here by tonight." "I'll come back then with them," I replied curtly. I turned and walked away before she could object further. I left her standing by that bench under the harsh sun, a frail, miserable figure in my peripheral vision as I headed to the parking lot. Her voice followed me, cracking on my name, but I didn't turn back. The drive home was a blur of tears and white-hot fury. I screamed in the confines of my car until my throat was raw. I pounded the steering wheel at a red light, the horn honking unintentionally as other drivers gave me odd looks. When I reached our house, my house, I corrected myself. I was so drained I could barely stumble through the front door. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it the previous morning. The mug from my hurried coffee still in the sink, the bed neatly made on my side, his side untouched from the night before his trip. It was like walking into a museum exhibit of my old life. before the explosion. It made me sick. I went straight to the liquor cabinet in the study. My hands were steady as I poured whiskey into a glass. I'd never been much of a drinker, but that night I swallowed one burning mouthful after another, eager for the numbness it promised. If there was ever a time in my life to start drinking, it was now. Each sip lit a small fire in my chest, temporarily blurring the edges of my pain. I sank onto the plush armchair, the same one where I'd curled up with novels on lazy Sunday afternoons, waiting for my husband to bring me a cup of tea. The betrayal cut so deep I could hardly comprehend it. With every fiery gulp, I replayed the last 2 days. The shock of the hospital, the horror of the police revelation, my mother-in-law's pleading face. Over and over, like a film reel stuck on the worst scene. At some point, I lost track of time. Darkness fell outside. I only realized how late it was when I tipped the whiskey bottle and got nothing but a few amber drops. I drained it completely. My head was buzzing, thoughts mercifully dulled. The pain was still there, oh yes, a raw wound in my heart, but it felt one step removed now, as if it were someone else's life. I managed to stagger to the couch in the living room. The room spun when I closed my eyes, so I kept them half open, staring at the ceiling until blackness finally swallowed me. A shrill sound yanked me out of sleep. My phone. I fumbled for it. It had fallen to the carpet beside the couch. Morning light was needling through the blinds. Everything hurt, my temples pounding, mouth dry as cotton. The phone was still ringing. Squinting at the screen, I saw a dozen missed calls and texts. Now another call was coming in, my daughter. I answered hoarsely, "Hello." "Mom," she cried, relief and anxiety woven into that one word. "We've been trying to reach you all night. Are you okay? How's Dad?" I sat up slowly, the room tilting. Memories of yesterday slammed back down on me. I'm here, I managed. I'm sorry. I must have passed out. I rubbed my throbbing forehead. I'm okay. Dad is stable. Are you two on your way? Yes, our flight lands in an hour, she said. We'll come straight from the airport. She hesitated, then in a smaller voice. Mom, what happened? Uncle Mark called and said Dad was attacked. Uncle Mark. Of course my husband's family would already be spreading their version of events. And likely not the full truth. We'll talk when you get here, sweetheart, I replied, forcing calm. Have you spoken to Grandma? She texted saying Dad's out of surgery. But she was weird. She wouldn't say much. Mom, I'm scared, my daughter admitted, voice breaking. I just want to see you. My heart clenched. I know, baby. I'll see you soon. Have a safe ride from the airport. After hanging up, I dragged myself to the shower, letting cold water pound my face. I needed to be sober, alert, and ready to support my kids through the bomb I was about to drop on their lives. The thought of telling them about their father's infidelity made me physically ill, but they deserved the truth. I wasn't going to lie for him. They arrived around mid-morning, bursting through the front door with overnight bags and anxious faces. I pulled them into a tight hug the moment they crossed the threshold. My son, normally stoic like his dad, was red-eyed and tense. My daughter's cheeks were wet with tears she was trying hard to hold back. We gathered in the living room. They peppered me with questions about their father's condition, and I answered those as reassuringly as I could. Yes, he'd recover. Yes, the doctors were optimistic. But my clipped tone and the dark circles under my eyes didn't escape their notice. My son looked at me searchingly. Mom, there's more, isn't there? What aren't you telling us? I realized I was pacing the length of the room, wringing my hands. I forced myself to sit down opposite them. These two young adults, our children, our pride and joy, deserved honesty. I drew in a long breath, feeling it shudder on the way out. There is more, I said quietly. They watched me, bracing themselves. I swallowed hard. Your father wasn't out of town for work. He was here, in a motel. The word hung heavy for a beat. He was with a woman. Not just any woman, someone he was involved with. She's the one who hurt him. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth. No, she whispered. My son just sat very still, as if made of stone. I told them everything as plainly as I could, that their father had been having an affair for some time, that the woman had stabbed him, nearly killed him, that the police were looking for her. As I spoke, I saw the shock and pain bloom on their faces. It mirrored what I had felt in that hallway at the hospital, hearing those words for the first time. When I finished, silence settled on us like a thick fog. My daughter broke it, voice trembling with anger and tears. Dad cheated? He cheated on you. She looked almost betrayed by the world itself, her concept of her loving father shattered in an instant. My son's eyes flashed with hurt. How could he trailed off, jaw tightening. I could tell he was holding back a flood of emotions the way he often did. At 19, he was trying to be a man about it, but I saw the little boy in his eyes, devastated that his dad wasn't the hero he thought. I'm so sorry you have to go through this, I whispered, reaching out to take both their hands. My voice cracked despite my resolve to stay strong for them. I know it's horrible. I wish I could shield you from it, but I won't lie. Not about this. They both moved at the same time, folding into me in a huddle of warmth and tears. We held each other for a long moment. In that embrace, I felt a glimmer of strength returning. Whatever happened, we at least had each other. Eventually, we collected ourselves enough to discuss what to do next. They, of course, wanted to see their father. They were terrified for his health despite their anger. I understood, he was still their dad. We agreed to head to the hospital together, but I warned them gently that things there might be tense. Their father's family would likely be present, and there was already conflict. Sure enough, when we arrived at the hospital ward, a small crowd of my husband's relatives was camped in the hall. His 2 sisters, a brother-in-law, and his mother, who had clearly told them something about what was going on. The moment they saw me step off the elevator with the twins, a hush fell. The polite, concerned smiles they gave my children did not extend to me. I got only cold, stony stares. I squared my shoulders, trying to ignore them. My children, bless them, went and hugged their grandma and aunts, murmuring greetings and asking about their dad. The older adults fussed over the twins, telling them how their father had just woken up for a bit and asked about them. I hung back, suddenly feeling like an outsider among people who had been my family for years. He's asking for the kids. My sister-in-law finally said to me, a certain frost in her tone. They should go in first, while he's awake. My daughter looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. Go on, I said softly. We'll be right here. As soon as the twins slipped into the room, the atmosphere in the hallway became unbearably thick. I could feel my in-law's eyes on me, heavy with judgment. My mother-in-law approached hesitantly. He's been asking for you too, she said. Maybe you should come say a few words. It would lift his spirits. I stared at her amazed. Lift his spirits? Did they expect me to swoon at his bedside with forgiveness? I said nothing, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from unleashing something I might later regret. One of his sisters, Karen, folded her arms and fixed me with a scowl. We've been here all night worried sick. Where were you? She snapped under her breath, careful to keep her voice low so the kids wouldn't hear from inside the room. The accusatory tone hit a nerve. Where was I? I was the one betrayed, yet here I was being chastised. I went home to rest, I replied evenly. Rest, Karen repeated, raising an eyebrow. Must be nice to have that luxury while your husband fights for his life. My mother-in-law put a hand on her arm, a meek attempt to hush her, but Karen brushed it off. Another sister muttered, honestly, heartless, under her breath. I felt heat rising to my face. They were blaming me, I realized with shock. In their eyes, I was the villain for not sitting vigil at the cheater's bedside. Maybe they even blamed me for the affair. That old insinuation that if a man strays, the wife must have driven him to it. I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was going to say, but the words that came out were icy and controlled. Don't you dare judge me, I said softly, yet each syllable was sharp. None of you have any idea what I'm feeling or what he's put me through. This is between him and me. My marriage, not yours. A flush crept up Karen's cheeks. We're just trying to hold this family together, she retorted. He needs us right now. He needs you. But you're too busy feeling sorry for yourself. I actually laughed, a short, incredulous laugh. Feeling sorry for myself? Your brother cheated on me and nearly got himself killed in the process, and you have the gall to paint him as the victim and me as some sort of selfish shrew. My voice trembled with contained fury. Another of his relatives hissed, keep your voice down. People at the other end of the hallway were starting to glance over. But once I started, I couldn't stop. Years of being the polite, accommodating in-law evaporated in that moment. I've been by his side out of basic decency and concern, but don't mistake that for obligation, I said, enunciating each word. He created this hell, not me. So I will decide in my own time how I deal with it. And none of you get to weigh in on that. Understand? Karen's eyes flashed. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to an angry whisper. He nearly died. Show some compassion. You can hate him later, but right now he needs you. You're his wife. I met her glare without flinching. Am I? I replied, just as quiet. Because he sure didn't act like I was his wife when he was off with that woman. I saw her flinch at that, but I pushed on. I am done being judged by you people. My marriage is none of your business. Back off. She looked ready to spit fire at me, but just then the door to the hospital room opened and my children came out. Both had reddened eyes, and my daughter was sniffling. Any argument in the hallway instantly ceased. All our masked faces of composure snapped back on for the sake of the twins. My son cleared his throat. Dad's asking for you, Mom, he said quietly. He looked conflicted, worried about his father's condition, but also keenly aware of the tension between me and his dad's family. My daughter gently touched my arm. Maybe just for a minute? He's really weak, she whispered. I paused. Part of me wanted to refuse. Let him feel the absence of my comfort. But one look at my kids' pleading faces and I mustered a nod. They didn't need another scene. Okay, I'll talk to him, I murmured. My husband's family parted like a troubled sea as I walked past. I could feel their disapproval trailing behind me, but I forced myself not to care. I took a steadying breath before entering the room. He looked so small on that bed. Bandages peeked out from under his hospital gown, and his face was ashen against the pillow. But his eyes were open now, and they fixed on me the second I stepped in, a glimmer of hope and shame mixed there. Machines beeped softly, measuring each fragile heartbeat, each breath. I stood at the foot of his bed, keeping a safe distance. It struck me that I felt like a stranger in this room, in this moment. Not a loving wife rushing to her injured husband's side, but a visitor, here out of formality. He must have sensed it too. His face crumpled with emotion. Hey, he croaked. His voice was weak, barely audible. Hey, I replied, arms hugging myself. An awkward silence followed. How many thousands of times had we spoken to each other with ease? And now we were reduced to this. He blinked back tears. He began, voice breaking. How are you? I almost laughed at the absurdity. How am I? Here he was, the one lying in a hospital bed stabbed and recovering from surgery, asking me about my well-being in a timid, almost casual way, as if we were going to discuss the weather or what I had for lunch. I couldn't even answer. Instead, one word slipped out, low and charged. Why? My throat tightened around it, and I realized that question held multitudes. Why did you cheat? Why her? Why throw away our life? Why nearly get yourself killed? Just why? His eyes overflowed then. A tear trickled down his temple and into his hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. It wasn't my fault. She attacked me. Please, you have to understand. I never meant. I love you. Only you. I felt nothing as I watched him cry. Or rather, I felt too much to identify any single emotion. Anger, betrayal, pity, disgust. They all swirled, leaving me cold and numb on the surface. He weakly lifted a hand, reaching out as if I might come closer and take it. I did not move. They forced me, he continued, voice cracking. I didn't. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. And then she went crazy. I was trying to end it, I swear. I closed my eyes briefly. The pathetic sound of him grasping for excuses was somehow worse than if he'd yelled at me. I cut him off softly. Don't. Just don't. Not here. My voice was flat. He gulped, more tears spilling. I love you, he said again like a plea. I looked at the man I'd loved for years, the man who was now a stranger to me, and felt an immense chasm between us. I don't know what I'm going to do, I said quietly, truthfully. But for now, I'll do what's needed. Our children deserve at least that. He nodded frantically, as if I'd offered a lifeline. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you. Save your strength, I interrupted, glancing at the monitors as his heart rate blipped faster from agitation. You need to rest. Focus on healing. We can talk later. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg for forgiveness some more, but I had nothing left to say. I turned and walked out before he could utter another word, leaving him with his belated regret. Outside, my twins looked at me anxiously. My daughter subtly searched my face for clues of reconciliation or further discord. I simply gave them a small nod. He's tired, I said. We won't stay long. Behind them, my husband's relatives watched with wary eyes. None of them spoke to me directly, but as I guided my children away, I heard Karen whisper sharply, I hope you're happy now, to my back. I stiffened but didn't turn. Ignore them, I told myself. In the elevator, I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Both kids flanked me, offering silent support. I felt my son's hand squeeze my shoulder gently. We're here for you, Mom, he said under his breath. My daughter nodded, slipping her hand into mine. In that moment, I knew whatever storm was yet to come, I wouldn't face it alone. The drive home from the hospital was somber, but oddly peaceful compared to the emotional minefield we'd navigated inside. The kids were exhausted and jet-lagged. They fell asleep in their rooms soon after we returned, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Alone. I savored it. I needed it. I retreated to the study, my sanctuary once, now tainted by last night's breakdown, and shut the door. The half-empty whiskey bottle on the desk glinted in the mid-afternoon light. I ignored it, though I desperately craved its oblivion again. Instead, I powered on my computer. If I wasn't going to drown my sorrows in alcohol, I would drown them in purpose. First, I dialed a number I knew by heart, our family attorney. He answered on the third ring with a cheerful greeting that quickly shifted to concern when I coldly requested an urgent meeting. This is about a divorce, I stated plainly. And I'll need a recommendation for a private investigator, too. He cleared his throat in surprise but didn't ask for details over the phone. He simply agreed to arrange a PI and set a time to meet me first thing in the morning. I hung up and sat for a moment, the word divorce echoing in my mind. Just 2 days ago, such an idea would have been inconceivable. Now, it felt like not just an option, but an inevitability, a beacon of justice in an otherwise senseless nightmare. An unexpected calmness settled over me as I realized I had crossed a threshold in that hospital hallway. My decision was made. I was leaving him. Full stop. But I needed more. More truth, more ammunition, not for some nasty court battle we didn't even have minor children to fight over, but for me. I needed the whole story of this affair, every dirty secret, so that not a shred of doubt or guilt could ever soften my resolve. I wasn't going to be that woman who wonders if she overreacted. The private investigator met with me 2 days later at a quiet cafe across town. I recognized him by the discreet camera bag and the notepad he was already scribbling in, bullet-pointing details I'd given him over the phone. He looked up and gave a polite nod as I slid into the booth. Mrs. K, he started. Ms., I corrected firmly. Just call me Anna. It was my first time using my maiden honorific in nearly 20 years. It felt strange, but right. He got straight to it. Calm, professional, thorough. I told him everything I knew so far. My husband's supposed trip, the hospital, what the police revealed. I even handed him a copy of the motel name and address gleaned from the police card left with me. The detective had scribbled it in tiny letters. Sunrise Motel. The PI's expression tightened at the mention of a motel and coworker. "This might be more common than you think," he said. "I'll start by working contacts at the police department, see if I can get access to their evidence or reports. With your permission, I'll also probe into your husband's phone and email records." "Do it," I said without hesitation. I provided what passwords I knew, though I suspected my husband had hidden his trucks well in that department. My stomach churned at the thought of reading their exchanges, but I steeled myself. Knowledge is power, I reminded myself. Over the next week, life took on a surreal duality. By day, I played the role of supportive spouse for the public eye, partly for my children's sake, partly to avoid stirring up more drama while my husband was still in fragile health. I accompanied the twins to the hospital each afternoon, sat quietly while they chatted with their dad about college or funny childhood memories to keep his spirits up. I could see the gratitude and hope rekindle in his eyes each time I walked into the room, but I offered him no warmth. I was polite, even helpful, fluffing his pillow when a nurse wasn't around, making sure the kids didn't stay too long and tire him out. To an outside observer, I might have appeared like a concerned wife. Inside, I felt like a hollow shell enacting a pantomime. My husband tried to catch my eye with every small gesture, a soft thank you here, a weak attempt at a smile there. I met each one with cool, unreadable calm. Our conversations remained superficial, as if we were strangers. He didn't dare bring up the affair or ask for forgiveness while I maintained such an aloof front, especially not in front of our children or his ever-watchful relatives. In a way, he seemed afraid of me, or at least afraid of what I might do. Good, I thought. He should be. By night, after I got my children settled, they insisted on staying a week home from college to ensure their dad was okay, and I suspect to keep an eye on me as well. I would retreat to the study to confer with the PI or consult with my lawyer. In the hush of midnight, I pored over every new tidbit of information the investigator unearthed, each revelation twisting the knife deeper, but also fortifying my resolve. The investigator did not disappoint. Within days, he had obtained security camera stills from the motel. I spread them out on my desk under the lamp, a nauseating flipbook of infidelity. One photo showed my husband, smiling and carefree, holding open a door for a woman with long dark hair as they entered the motel lobby. Another, time-stamped 2 hours later, showed that same woman sprinting out a side exit, a dark stain splashed across her blouse. His blood, I realized with a shudder. Other images captured her face fairly clearly, and even the license plate of the car she peeled away in. The PI had already run it. The car was a rental, paid for with a credit card belonging to a Linda S., whose name made my stomach turn. Linda. The other woman had a name now, an identity that the PI traced with swift efficiency. He sat across from me in my study as I examined the dossier he'd compiled. "Her name is Linda T," he explained. 35 years old. She's a project manager at your husband's company. Married with a young child. I closed my eyes, absorbing the blow. So she had a husband too, and a child. 2 families wrecked by their selfishness. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing her world was likely exploding right about now as well. According to the PI, she disappeared after the attack, but turned herself in once the police tracked her husband, who had reported her missing. She was now facing charges for attempted murder and was in custody. The PI cleared his throat and continued gently. "I spoke with some of the co-workers off the record. It seems your husband and Linda had been carrying on for a few months. They were careful, but people noticed they often worked late together or went to lunch off-site." I looked at a printed email the PI had obtained, likely through legal gray areas, between my husband and Linda. It was mundane, just a scheduling note about a meeting, but the tone was overly familiar. There were others I refused to read in detail after scanning a few lines of nauseating flirtation and even an intimate photo she'd sent. I set them aside, unwilling to torture myself further. "They fought often, it seems," the PI went on. "Some said Linda was jealous and temperamental. There was gossip that she expected him to leave you, and he kept stalling. The last fight was the day of the incident. They left the office separately but ended up at that motel. My guess is she gave an ultimatum, or he tried to break things off, and she snapped." I stared at a photo of her, a candid shot from social media the PI had included. She was pretty in a generic way. It struck me as absurd that my husband threw away so much for something so ordinary. There was no glamour, no mystique, just another bored suburban professional looking for thrills. And now a criminal. "Thank you," I murmured, closing the folder. It was thick with evidence, more than enough to confront him, to confront everyone. I realized my hands were trembling slightly, not from despair this time but from the adrenaline of vindication. I had everything I needed to proceed with absolute certainty. With the facts in hand, I moved swiftly. My lawyer filed divorce papers citing adultery, and thanks to the PI's thorough package, we had incontrovertible proof. There would be no contesting who was at fault here. We also prepared to hit where it might hurt him beyond pride, his wallet and career. By engaging a top-notch labor attorney, I initiated a lawsuit against both my husband and Linda for violating workplace policy. Their affair, consummated on company time and premises, had caused reputational damage to the firm. It was a long-shot claim, but the mere threat of scandal and litigation was enough to make his company's leadership take notice and lean on HR to deal with them quietly. I was meticulous and patient those weeks while my husband recovered at the hospital and then came home. I let him assume my silence and civility were the beginnings of forgiveness. In truth, they were the calm before the storm I was carefully crafting. I smiled and said little when his mother exclaimed how wonderful it was to see us both under the same roof again when he was discharged. I remained impassive as he gingerly settled back into our home, walking on eggshells around me but clearly hopeful that I was coming around. He tried numerous times to apologize properly, to explain himself. I always stopped him gently, saying, "You need to rest. We'll have plenty of time to talk later." He likely interpreted that as a chance for eventual redemption. He had no idea that later was the moment I was poised to crush any remaining delusion he had about our future. Finally, the day came. The kids had returned to campus. His family had gone back to their lives after convincing themselves that I was caring for him and all would blow over. We had the house to ourselves. Ironically, it was exactly 1 month to the day since his fateful business trip. He was recovering well physically, enough that my waiting was no longer out of concern for his health but purely for the strategic timing of catching him off guard. That afternoon, I called him into the study. The same room where I had wept in despair and plotted in secret now served as the courtroom where I would pass sentence. He entered slowly, a cautious smile on his face. Perhaps he thought I wanted to finally talk things through. In a sense, I did. The study was unusually empty. I had tidied it of personal items. No family photos on the shelves. No keepsakes. The only clutter was the manila folder on the desk containing the fruits of the PI's investigation and the legal documents. He noticed the change in decor immediately. His eyes swept the barren shelves, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "You've cleaned up in here," he said softly. I nodded. "Please have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. I sat in the leather chair behind it, clasping my hands on the wooden surface to keep them from shaking. Oddly, I felt very calm, even as my heart drummed with anticipation. He sat, winced slightly, his wounds still healing beneath his loose shirt, and gave me an expectant look. "What did you want to talk about?" I took a moment to really look at him. He appeared smaller somehow, humbled and aged by guilt. Good. I wanted him to feel every ounce of the pain and humiliation he'd caused, not out of petty revenge, but because it was the only way he might truly understand the gravity of what he'd done. Whether he understood or not in the end was no longer my concern, however. I was beyond needing his comprehension or remorse for closure. This was about me taking back control. From the top of the folder, I drew out a photograph, the motel lobby still of him and Linda holding hands. I pushed it across the desk toward him. "Do you remember this place?" I asked, voice steady. He flinched as if slapped. The color drained from his face. He didn't touch the photo, but his eyes registered it instantly. A vein in his temple began to pulse. He stammered. I didn't wait for an answer. I laid down another image, him and her at a coffee shop near their office, heads close together, laughing about something. And another, a printout of an email where he told me he was working late on a night he had, in fact, taken Linda to dinner. Evidence of lie after lie after lie. I fanned them out like a deck of cards, each one exposing a different facet of his deceit. He stared, mouth agape, at the incriminating spread on the table. His eyes welled up. "Anna, don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't waste either of our time with more excuses or apologies. I didn't bring you in here to argue or to listen to you beg. I brought you here to witness." He looked up at me, confused and frightened. "Witness what?" "Consequences," I replied, pulling out the final 2 documents. The first was our divorce petition. I slid it forward. "I filed for divorce, citing adultery. Here is the proof, neatly compiled by a private investigator, should we need to use it in court. Frankly, given the overwhelming evidence, I doubt we'll see a courtroom. You have no leg to stand on." He paled further, if that was possible. "Divorce," he whispered, as if he never truly believed I'd go through with it. He reached a trembling hand toward the papers but then withdrew it, afraid to touch this reality. "Yes," I said. "Divorce." The word hung between us, solid and irreversible. I felt a strange surge of power saying it out loud in his presence. "You didn't think I would stay, did you? Even you couldn't be that deluded." Tears spilled over his cheeks now. I was hoping after everything that maybe I'd forgive and forget like a good little wife. I couldn't help the bitter edge to my voice. "If the knife that woman drove into you didn't end your fantasy, let me spell it out clearly. We are done. There is nothing that can fix this. Not your tears, not time, not even if I still loved you, which, by the way, I'm no longer sure I do." He crumpled at that, covering his face with his hands as ragged sobs escaped him. I watched, detached. There was a time when seeing him cry would have broken my heart. Now, it barely moved the needle. Perhaps I'd cried too many tears of my own to have sympathy left for his. I let him sob for a moment. Then I tapped the second document on the table. "Move your hands," I instructed calmly. "Look at this." He sniffled and obeyed, blinking to focus through tears. His brow furrowed as he read the heading on the letter. A notice of intent to sue, addressed to both him and her, from my attorney. "This is a formal notice," I explained coolly. "I'm suing both you and Linda for damages. Her, primarily for the physical assault and emotional distress to me and our family. And you, for the financial fallout and reputational damage your actions have caused." He looked up in bewilderment. "Sue me? But we can handle this between us, surely." I arched an eyebrow. "Handle it between us? Like you handled betraying me? No. The time for internal handling is over. Now it's about external accountability." He reached for my hands across the desk, but I pulled back, folding my arms. "Anna, please," he implored, voice cracking. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But dragging this through the courts, it will destroy me. Destroy us financially. Now you're worried about finances?" I shot back, anger finally flaring through my icy composure. "Did you think about our finances when you carried out an affair that could get you both fired and sued? Because guess what your little romp did cost your company. They've been slapped with bad press and an internal investigation. One of their big clients caught wind of the scandal and isn't pleased. I'd say that qualifies as damaging the corporate image, wouldn't you?" He looked genuinely shocked, as if he hadn't considered that collateral damage. Of course he hadn't. He hadn't considered much beyond his own gratification. "I have a very good labor lawyer," I continued. "He's confident the company will settle quietly to avoid a lawsuit and publicity, especially with Linda's criminal case bringing unwanted attention. And you, well, you'll be expected to contribute too. Maybe your personal savings, maybe any severance they toss you in exchange for your quiet departure." He seemed unable to breathe for a moment. They're going to fire me?" I shrugged. "I would if I were them. At minimum, you're a massive liability now. At worst, complicit in a situation that ended in attempted murder on company property, if that motel counts as a workplace liaison." I tapped the table impatiently. "But that's none of my concern anymore. I care about what I lost because of this. And I assure you, I will be compensated. By both of you." His earlier grief was quickly morphing into panic and a touch of anger. He wiped his face, jaw quivering. "This is ruthless," he said softly. "I nearly died, Anna. And I know I betrayed you, but do you really want to ruin me completely? Haven't I paid enough?" That made me snap. "Paid enough?" I echoed, standing up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "You think you've paid? What exactly have you paid aside from some hospital bills?" My voice rose. "You destroyed our marriage. You shattered the image our children had of their father. You risked all our financial security and health. God knows if you used protection with her or if she might have come after our family next. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. And you nearly died, yes, by the hands of your mistress, which is a consequence in itself, but not one that absolves you of fault. So don't you stand there and dare imply you've suffered more than enough and I should ease up." He shrank back, tears drying as shock settled in. He had never seen me like this. I had never been like this. Cold, vengeful, formidable. I almost didn't recognize myself, but at the same time, I felt more me than I had in years. There is a particular clarity that comes when you have nothing left to lose. I took a slow breath, regaining composure. In a quieter tone, I continued, "This isn't about punishing you for kicks. It's about me not letting your actions rob me of any more than they already have. I lost my husband, my trust, my peace of mind. I refuse to lose my dignity or my future stability. So yes, I will pursue every avenue to set things right for myself and our kids. If that leaves you in ruins." I met his eyes with a steely gaze. "Well, those are the wages of your sins." He said nothing for a long time. Silent tears kept rolling down his face, but the fight in him seemed gone. He looked broken. "Good," a voice in me said. "Let him break." I didn't enjoy his suffering, but I accepted it as necessary. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse whisper. What happens now?" I gathered the papers back into the folder slowly, methodically. "Now I move on. And you live with it." With that, I turned and left him sitting there, head in his hands. I shut the study door behind me with a decisive click and walked away, feeling the weight of that dark chapter fall off my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath unfolded predictably. My husband, now officially ex-husband, as the divorce sailed through without contest, vacated the house and went to stay with his mother temporarily. He didn't fight my terms. In fact, he signed the settlement papers without a word. Perhaps he realized there was no salvaging anything, or perhaps he was simply too defeated to prolong the pain. The company quietly negotiated a compensation package with my attorney to dissuade any formal lawsuit. The sum was substantial. I ensured a portion was set aside for our kids' remaining college tuition and future needs. As for Linda, she pled guilty to the assault. A media frenzy flared up around the sensational story of the office affair that turned violent. I was thankful our names were mostly kept out of it, referred to only obliquely in court documents. She received a prison sentence for what she'd done to him, and I was granted a restraining order on behalf of my family for good measure. Not that she was likely to bother us from a cell, but one can never be too careful. The legal motions did little to mend emotional wounds, but they gave me a sense of justice at least, and something like closure. When all was said and done, I emerged from it all financially stable and with my head held high. I had stood up for myself in every way possible. One late afternoon, a few days after everything was finalized, I found myself alone in my new apartment, a modest but bright place downtown I'd rented after selling the house. Too many memories there to bear. I stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city below hum with life. The sky was turning shades of orange and pink as the sun prepared to set. Or maybe it was rising on another part of the world. In that quiet moment, I realized how strangely at peace I felt. The anger had burned out, leaving a tempered strength in its wake. I thought of my children, how they had both called me earlier to say how proud they were of me, how supportive they remained of my decisions. Our bonds were intact, perhaps even stronger. I thought of my ex-husband, somewhere out there, living the consequences of his choices, disgraced, alone, likely battling his own regrets and sorrows. I felt a pang of sadness for the life we once had, but it was distant, like remembering a story about someone else. The sun dipped lower, a final flare of gold on the horizon. I closed my eyes and let the warmth fall on my face through the glass. This wasn't the future I had envisioned even 2 months ago. But it was mine now, unwritten and full of possibility. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed but forged anew. Wiser, stronger, free. As the room fell into soft twilight, I opened the window and breathed in the cool evening air. It smelled faintly of jasmine from a nearby rooftop garden. A small, genuine smile found its way to my lips, the first in a long, long time. It's over, I thought to myself, with equal parts relief and resolve. In the silence, I whispered a quiet goodbye to the pain, to the love that once was, to the woman I had been before. Then I welcomed the calm that followed, the gentle, steady calm of a life reclaimed. It tasted oddly like vindication, a bit bitter, yes, but clean. A beginning, tinted with the pale light of a promising dawn.